There's one more secret I feel I have to share with you. I did not care for
the amazing digital circus.
What?
Did not care for
The amazing digital circus. Hey, Crowlee here. No, I don't know what's wrong with me. The Amazing Digital Circus is a show that I like. It's a good show, almost objectively a good show, if that even exists. I just have a never-ending amount of nitpicks with it that chip away at my investment little by little that I haven't seen anyone mention in anywhere near a constructive manner, and I can't keep pretending to see the show in as great of a light as most of the fandom. Sorry. I know I'm gonna spend a good while talking about my grievances with it, but rest assured, I'm only trying to hit it with a hammer to figure out why, as much as I can recognize how good it is, it simply doesn't click for me. I know. A video talking about the somewhat subjective flaws of a good show. What a concept. I'm sure no one will ever be mad at me for this. Why would you ever click on this video if you don't know what the amazing... Dude, it has like 1 billion views. I'm not explaining this to you. The only thing I hate more than essays that only recap a piece of media and don't actually add anything is essays that take like half an hour to start. People get trapped in a simulation, yada yada, somewhat sentient AI totally doesn't torture them. If you want more context, just watch the show. It's free. It's good. Moving on. Before I truly dissect the why, I need to establish some groundwork. I genuinely did not connect with this show till episode 6, or much after that, really. I remember texting my buddy Ossie, shout out to Ossie, he's heard enough of my rants about this, when episode 6 came out, saying, "This is the first time I've actually cared." I texted him, "This show has gone back to good, but not connecting," just 2 episodes later. After my rewatch, I can say I managed to care about Ragatha's whole deal most episodes, even if I don't completely enjoy the way it's resolved or much of her character after it, but you know. And I did enjoy Gangle in episode 4 specifically. The hit to miss ratio in the actually caring department this show has with me remains very low regardless. And as much as I enjoyed it, I really gotta insist that there's a difference between enjoyment and emotional connection. Here's a list of the realistically small things I think collectively make me unable to connect with the show in order of when I'll mention them. It is important to note that it's not any one of these points specifically, but the collection of small grievances that prevent me from truly calling this show a masterpiece. Every show has flaws. Yes, even the one you're thinking of. This one just fails to make me care regardless of that. I'd say my biggest issue with the Amazing Digital Circus is what I'd call the Danganronpa problem. Yeah, I know, even mentioning Danganronpa absolutely genocides my credibility. Or extremism of text, or maybe flip-flopping of suspension of disbelief. I don't know, I gotta workshop that one. But to make it very, very simple, it's asking you how many sides an octagon has in the same fucking trial, then make you wrap your head around whatever this thing is. Or, in the Amazing Digital Circus's case, having plot points, foreshadowing, and subtext that you wouldn't catch unless you actively sit to analyze the show, or worse, go basically frame by frame, and then literally sitting you down to tell you the point of something, and there being little to no in between. I refer to this issue as the Danganronpa problem, because, well, if you've played Danganronpa, you know why. And if you haven't, you don't know how much I envy you. Amongst the myriad of issues with those goddamn games, there's a good amount of character arcs, motivations, and general mysteries that require you to have pretty decent reading comprehension, and then many others that literally hit you in the head with the answer till you die of internal bleeding. If a single character asks someone else to repeat the thing they literally just said a single more time, I swear to God. The point's that there's an inconsistent level of thought you need to put into things. As a writer, you can't really treat me both like a baby and a PhD in literary analysis. If you want me to care, pick a struggle. I can't count how many times this show just broke my suspension of disbelief by expecting me not to think too hard about some of its plot points, and then expecting me to think a lot for others. It's not that any individual thing was an issue, but more so the sheer inconsistency of it. Things literally don't matter at all, or missing them means a future plot point will feel contrived. A lot of arcs I'm being told heavily affect the characters are heavily reliant on interpretation of a few specific scenes and inference based on real-life phenomenons because they're barely touched upon before sitting you down. If you do a baseline reading of the show without thinking of it too much, it comes off as kinda preachy, sorta random, and incredibly simple. And yet the show doesn't encourage the viewer to engage with itself all that much to disprove that. I feel I'm not making enough sense here, so I'll give an example based on plot and one based on characters, because the main ways to get someone to care are plot and characters. Gravity Falls is the king of analysis-based foreshadowings. There's no way around it. It's hard to deny that the entire show is designed around its mysteries and secret codes and everything else in a way that makes it extremely obvious that that's the correct way to engage with it. The only episodes that I'd say actively encourage theorizing are episodes 1 and 8. Episode 7 even actively mocks the theorizing aspect. I'd actually bet that plot theorizing is not, in fact, the intended way to engage with the amazing digital circus. And it doesn't need to be. But in this specific case, it means that the big majority of people will simply not pick up on the pieces of quote-unquote subtle foreshadowing, which I've noticed sometimes leads to them feeling as if things come out of nowhere. Like Mr. Mannequin over here, who was in the show before, by the way, or the whole Caine and Abel thing, or King being a programmer. With Gravity Falls, it doesn't really matter how casual of a viewer you are. You might not actively go around decoding the mysteries, but you can, and most importantly, you know you can. Anyone who sees a jumble of letters or a very clearly reversed audio or anything else in this show that is all about conspiracies and theories and mysteries will know that there's probably more to dig. Meanwhile, unless you're very active on the discussion side of this fandom, or are, again, rewatching the series 500 times, you're probably not gonna notice there's just about anything to analyze. And what's worse, even if you do decide to analyze and dig, a lot of what you'll find isn't deep enough to truly encourage searching either. So CNA means Caine and Abel. So what? Ragatha doesn't know Breaking Bad, therefore she arrived to the circus before Jax and Subal. What does that actually add? A lot of theorizing around this show falls flat for me, because I don't really think a lot of these details actually matter to the story or characters in any way that makes it more interesting. Regardless, a lot of my favorite pieces of media have incredibly boring plots, or even barely a plot at all. And I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to think about the actual plot of the show all that much. It's more so context for the characters, which could work if I actually found the characters interesting. Before you yell at me, I'm not saying this show has no depth. Just that, hand in hand with the hidden details that don't even really amount to that much, if there's something interesting going on with the characters, chances are it's going to be right in the surface. The thing about having a surface level plot is that you kinda have to make up for it by having in-depth character work, or in-depth discussions about, well, whatever your show's about. At least if your show is interesting in being quote-unquote deep. Outside of one specific character, I don't know if there's anything to know about these people that we aren't told explicitly. Which is strange, because the show projects an aura of there being things to know. They literally sit you down once an episode to spoon-feed you these people's problems, yet there's just a lack of significant subtext that makes it incredibly hard for me to actually connect with most of them. They made it too easy, I guess. Danganronpa, yes, I'm gonna use those shit-ass games as a good example. I will not apologize. It's a strangely similar case here. On one hand, it's the game that made me realize a big dissonance on the level of thought I was expected to have for different parts of the story could take me out of it. On the other, out of the things I think genuinely have this issue, it's one of the lowest offenders. It benefits from being a video game, so a lot of the conversations that would feel heavy-handed on a series end up feeling real just by the fact that you need to go out of your way to get to them. If Gravity Falls is a great example on how to do hidden or subtle foreshadowing and subtext well, Danganronpa is, and I can't believe I'm saying this, a great example on how to be extremely explicit. Especially because even in its most explicit, this is what is happening here moments, it still lets you dig more, especially character and motivations. The feeling of connection to a story and its characters that can be achieved by just letting the viewer feel like they figured out this thing cannot be matched, really. And I think that's a big part of what's missing from the amazing digital circus for me. Effort. If I dig any more than the show gives me directly, I keep finding nothing but dead ends. Danganronpa might have many issues, but a lot of what makes me enjoy those games is the almost endless analytical depth you can dig into if you choose. Some of it might not even be intended by the writers, but it leaves you feeling closer to them regardless. Also, the characters actually have distinct personalities. Have I mentioned that I don't think the characters in the Amazing Digital Circus have distinct personalities? Let me get directly to it. This show is surprisingly filled with therapy talk. There goes yet another one of those therapy moments where Pomni sits with one of the characters and they work through their problems, am I right? The thing is that if Pomni was the only character that had that trait, I would not consider it an issue. Having a normal-ish character at the center of others' madness is in no way a new concept. The thing is that most of the cast have this trait. Every single one of the characters I put here has done some amount of therapy. This side is especially egregious. It's not that it's inherently wrong, but it does make me check out of a lot of the moments that should be impactful because the people that are talking in these scenes are speaking like they're being held at gunpoint to say the right thing. They're speaking like they completely understand their own emotions and self-conflicts and the conflicts of the people around them and know exactly the right thing to say, which is not bad, but extremely uninteresting and makes the cast virtually indistinguishable outside of small details. Tell me, who said this line? Because by words alone, I could not tell you. They all read like the same extremely emotionally healthy person said them. In media, the flaws are often the best parts. I don't want characters who understand themselves wholly, and I don't like it when their issues are resolved by another character saying exactly the right thing. I don't mind it in moderation, and when you mix one of those things with separate flaws, it can be great, but truthfully, I don't know what most of these characters' character flaws are supposed to be. I'm ignoring this side, I actually care about this side. Plus Ragatha, I suppose. But Gangle, Pomni, Kinger, Civil, I know they have internal conflicts, especially Gangle. I doubted if I should even include in this part of the discussion, but I don't really know if any of those conflicts could be called character flaws. When I say character flaws, I mean mostly personality flaws. Things that the characters are doing wrong that they can, in one way or another, try and change to better mesh with the people around them or the world they live in. And in their success or failure to do so, they become better people or worse people. That is also an acceptable option. That is a viable character arc. I'll talk about Ragatha's flaws in a positive light later. She's a good example of having glaring character flaws without being a bad person. Character flaws aren't necessarily a moral failure, and vice versa. It's just a trait that a character has that creates some sort of conflict or friction with other characters. Hopefully many other characters. Anyway, Subal is a bit blunt, but what are they doing wrong necessarily? Maybe they're a little rude, I guess. You could spin that argument. A bit self-isolating at the beginning, sort of. But the show never puts any actual focus on that or them needing or trying to change. When does this attitude or any of their attitudes actually alienate them? Maybe if the isolation thing was established to be because of that bluntness or something, or they had any kind of arc or struggle around it or around other personality traits. But then suddenly the self-isolating thing just doesn't seem to be a problem without any tangible work or change. They just made a friend. Realistic, their issues are simply reasonable reactions to the setting, not actual negative or at least not sufficiently negative personality issues, but not engaging. Also, no, Body Dysphoria isn't a character flaw. If I had to tell you that, I don't know, reconsider. And yeah, Gangle is a bit of a crybaby, but the show presents it as completely Jax's fault. And I mean, it definitely kind of is. But these aren't traits that by themselves create conflicts with other people and or hinder their capacity to achieve goals in any real way. Jack is the issue here, that is his character flaw, as shown by it being resolved by just distancing her from him. I will be touching upon their relationship a little bit later, because I have some slight issues with it too. Anyway, Kinger is just insane most of the time, which is not a character flaw, nor does it generally create conflict. This isn't an Ice King situation where the madness makes them do awful shit with literally no control nor a way to bring them back, at least for the longest time. Realistically, how hard is it to find a dark place? Kinger is constantly lucid. If the circus stays dark after episode 7, it will just not be an issue without any actual emotional work from any of the characters. It's just a plot device for Kinger to not communicate the things he knows. And in a show that seems to tell me that it's all about the characters, I expect characters working. Actually, the fact that a lot of these characters don't have real personal goals due in part to the setting might be part of the issue. You can still want things in limbo. Anyway, their character arcs. What even are they? I'll give Gangle a pass for barely going above the line of what I consider a character arc. even if it's mostly just people standing up for her more and being generally separated from Jax, and not any real tangible change or work on any traits that we knew her to have before and not have now. I like the metaphor from episode 4, but as actual character growth, this is the equivalent to temporary mind alteration, which isn't an arc. Pomni definitely changes, but I'd honestly chalk that more to acclimating to the circus than any real growth or change. Same for Suvel, which, speaking of which, why do none of these people feel like they've been in the circus for longer than a week? Pomni just arrived and she's already used to the circus somehow. But Suvel, why are they just now acclimating? Why did they never do anything about the Gangle thing or form relationships before Pomni arrived? Pomni has like nothing to do with this change, by the way. And the same goes for a lot of the confs. They just feel like they spawned when or a little before Pomni did. For a show where I've seen critiques about the characters always being kind of uncomfortable, I'd say they're no near uncomfortable enough. Character arcs are supposed to challenge your characters in multiple consequential ways, oppose their beliefs, reaffirm them. Even if I was to count Pomni's, Gangle's, and Suvel's deals as arcs, they'd be less of an arc and more of a straight line. Back to the Gangle and Jax thing, I'm being told he's abusive in this incredibly on-the-nose sit-down conversation. But we barely actually see that abuse. The only episodes where he actively mistreats her are 1 and 2. Even then, 1 is presented as comedic, so I don't know if that counts. She literally clockwork oranges him in episode 4. And they're separated every other episode. Added to the fact that characters are constantly being maimed in cartoonish yet way worse ways than Jax ever does to Gangle, and don't seem to feel much pain, if at all, or be nowhere near as upset as her, makes it incredibly hard for me to take serious. I get that we're supposed to assume it's been going on for way longer than the show shows, but the amount of it that the show presents as even remotely non-comedic is extremely low. I can't base 90% of my investment on assumptions. There's a lot of fun made, well, everything, where Gangle blows up at Jax, and I think that would be great in the show, but it hasn't happened. It hasn't even remotely happened. Ultimately, I struggle to care about these people because they don't seem like people to me. They're too similar to each other, too emotionally mature, too surface level, and too perfect. They either don't have character flaws or their quote-unquote character flaws aren't sufficiently presented as such. I can't care about their issues because they're barely even presented as issues. Abstraction is the biggest existential horror and the biggest stake of the show, yet is almost never presented as truly terrible, till it's way too late for me to digest it as what it's actually supposed to be. This scene was cool though. Yet again, the issue is conflict, because it all boils down to conflict. If you don't have substantial character flaws, you don't have substantial interpersonal breaks, and you don't have substantial, well, yeah, conflicts. Even the conflicts that do exist, like Gangle's shyness and depression, or Suvel's body dysmorphia, are barely touched upon outside of when they, again, literally sit to perfectly communicate these issues. It could work if there were enough deeper conflicts besides or around those, but the conflicts that could carry the weight, like Gangle's and Jax's relationship, are also more told than shown. And I've heard people say that this is a show about communication and its importance, and I want to acknowledge that if that's in fact supposed to be the case, therapy talk can be a way to set the positive example, even if I personally disagree with it being an effective way of communication, because real humans mostly can't sufficiently explain themselves and are weighed down by biases when trying to listen, because language is an eldritch being. But even if the antagonists do definitely share the traits of refusing to speak about their issues and or refusing to listen, the rest of the characters kind of fall in this strange limbo of never being truly challenged on it, while simultaneously refusing to share important information for truly no reason. If Pomni is supposed to be the positive example, all of the therapy talk and forcing Jax to communicate, why is she so frequently omitting information? It's not even like she's actively trying to hide it. She kinda hints at King's whole thing, but she never outright tells anyone. At least not till it's way too late. Same about the mannequin thing. She sees him way before the rest of the group, yet doesn't share till episode 6. This is actually much more of a nitpick and way less important. It's not like the theme is completely butchered. It's pretty good and it works. I don't know, it just doesn't help my care meter, and I realized all of this while recording. So that part was not very scripted, if you couldn't tell. I don't know, it kinda doesn't feel like the show is doing this on purpose. Even if it probably is. Especially now that the main villain went full evil by listening to someone else instead than it being directly influenced and him refusing to. Which was what was being set up. No, not physically hearing the group talk about accepting their fate doesn't count. It is sort of ironic and good writing, but it doesn't directly influence his decision, and the group wasn't actively rebelling before this, so also not hearing someone isn't the same as not listening, I'd say. I like Ragatha because she is toxically positive. I don't agree with the people that call her manipulative or a bad person or a bunch of other things because, well, she's not. But the way she's approaching the people around her is clearly isolating her. And that's a character flaw. She doesn't really do anything wrong, yet she's been here the longest and is somehow the most alone. Even Jax, who is way more abrasive than her, seems to form connections way easier. There's no doubt an interpersonal issue. So I really like that small character arc she has, even if it does conclude on one of the trademark therapy moments and or off screen. I can look past her knowing how to explain her feelings so poetically, even if it does sort of remind me that this is a show with a writer behind it, because the conclusions they get to in the talk aren't really what I expected. Also, I don't think she's correct on what her issue is, which is what I wanted. I don't want characters knowing what their issue is. I didn't guess she felt guilty about Jax before this, and Kinger's insight is really good. On the subtext line, Ragatha is the subject of a piece of interpretation-based subtext I actually quite like. When Kinger asks her if she wants to help him count his eggs before they hatch. I've seen people relate that to the children King didn't have with Queenie, which, if true, is really stupid. The show doesn't even remotely hint at that. But the way I saw it was as a metaphor about Ragatha's treatment of Pomni. She's isolated from the current cast, and now there's a new gal. Ragatha attaches to her heavily, maybe counting this friendship before it's even born. That line is in the same episode that Ragatha starts becoming disillusioned with Pomni, especially due to her relationship to Jax. So I'd say my interpretation does have legs. That's a piece of incredibly subtle subtext that actually tells me more about the character if I choose to look into it, assuming I'm right about what it means, of course. Jax is also very honestly flawed. I don't really have issues with him. I like that he creates conflict, and I like that he seems to be the only character where you can actually speculate what's going on in that noggin of his. Considering Ragatha does eventually sit down to tell you her issues, even if she is just as interesting before that. For example, a lot of people interpreted this line.
Have you ever thought that this might be what causes people to abstract in the first place?
As him somehow being culpable for someone's abstraction, when I think it very blatantly states that he's about to abstract, because yeah, no shit. But in that context, it reads as an admission that he knows this thing he's doing to cope won't last him much longer, and that he knows he's acting awful. It paints Pomni's line as her showing very angry concern for him, instead of blaming him for other people's states. He should be a little blamed for other people's states. But it even reframes that same acting out as simply what happens when someone's about to go. It doesn't excuse it, but it definitely paints it as inevitable. And that's juicy stuff, man. Regardless of how specifically you interpret it, the fact that there's interpretation to be done is enough. That's why this is the episode that made me care for the show. Even if briefly, Pomni cutting through his bullshit immediately was great, and a big deviation from the I can fix him thing I thought was going on. Gangle also gets a pass for being mostly okay and genuinely pretty good in episode 4. I don't really truly connect with her struggles outside of that specific episode, but you know, something. Anyway, I was way too positive there. You might start thinking I actually like this show. They're just constantly goddamn moving, man. Fidgeting, micro-expressions, they're all great if used purposely, but with a lot of modern 3D, it just seems like they have the budget to do it, so they have to do it constantly. They just put a lot of extra movement, and that's just not always necessary. I enjoy a lot more stylized movement with clear pulsing and the animation maker. That is modern Disney also does this way too much. Poppers is the perfect example. Older Disney movies like Tangled or the first couple episodes of the show strike a better balance in my opinion. I don't quite like that the show keeps changing its style. This wasn't really an issue that I noticed when I was watching the episodes as they came out, but when writing the script I had to do a rewatch, and it was really jarring to watch one episode after another. I've noticed that the aesthetics really do not stay consistent from one episode to another. Now, I don't know if this was a conscious stylistic choice. If from the beginning they said, hey, we're gonna be changing the aesthetics every single episode. Well, maybe I just don't get it, and I respect that. It just sort of feels like a byproduct of increased budget, and I don't vibe with that as much. I found the graphics of earlier episodes a lot more charming, even if technically worse. The style also low-key flanderizes the character designs. This is, yet again, a thing with animation in general nowadays. Just big eyes, bigger mouth, big, expressive, rounded edges everywhere. Knights of Guinevere actually kind of makes fun of this in one of the scenes. Some of the jokes really don't land. And I think this wouldn't be as noticeable if it wasn't because this show is fucking hilarious pretty much always. The comedy on this show is generally really good, but there are a couple of times where delivery, or rather the timing, is just kind of strange. I'm totally just thinking about one specific scene actually. When Pomni wants to retrieve Ragatha's eye, and first off, everything that happens underwater is hilarious. But then she comes out of the water and Ragatha asks her if she's got her eye, and Pomni answers about the fact that the treasure chest had already been looted. Ragatha is, rightfully confused, but the way it's structured and paced, mainly the fact that the underwater scene is so short, makes this seem very jarring, because I'm not Ragatha here. I know what Pomni's talking about, but I'm also not with Pomni because, girl, you just went down there. How did you forget the IDs fast? Like, genuinely, I got confused the first time I heard it because the pacing just didn't make any sense to me. I don't know. This isn't specific to comedy, though. There are a good handful of scenes that are paced weirdly. They either linger too long or don't go for long enough to sit with the feeling that they're supposed to communicate. And, it is possible to do that purposefully. I'm just not quite sure that the show did it purposefully, at least most of the times. I think it all does generally go back to the surprising lack of conflict, considering the premise. Have you noticed that a lot of the fights are cut short or pushed to the background? And they're always about Caine or Jax. I already went over how a lot of the characters' quote-unquote flaws are just reasonable reactions to them. You cannot tell me that the circus wouldn't be perfectly peaceful without them both there. Speaking of which, this is my last complaint, and honestly what led me to make this video in the first place. I don't like Caine, at least not after this last episode. And I don't mean morally or in a personality sense. Even if I do think that he is not that funny, I like Jax regardless of how much of a shit he is. And I like Ragatha regardless of how boring I think she is, personality-wise. But Caine literally does nothing for me anymore. I like the idea of an Am-like character that tortured prisoners not by malice but by accident, while trying to fulfill this programming and repeatedly failing more and more at it. Till episode 7, that's what he seemed to be. Sure, he lied, and I have no issues with that if he truly believes lying is what will get him praised the most. Sure, he kinda tortures the characters, especially through their rooms and bodies, but if he's an AI using the data he was provided, that is a reasonable mistake for him to make. AIs don't actually understand how emotions work. If he thought this was all the best course of action to please the people giving him feedback, that'd be great. The fact that he's egregiously wrong in his judgment being a plus. That's just how AIs are. And it's also just very interesting story-wise. But then episode 8 goes all on him being an active villain, which the show didn't need. And I think it's a lot less interesting. His whole evil boys active torture I'm God thing just isn't compelling to me, and doesn't really mesh well with his previous characterization. I just feel like they could have gone a way more interesting way by keeping his sort of insane, definitely narcissistic by human standards, oblivious persona, for him to truly want the best for the circus, as it would get him praise, but fail more and more at every episode. No real break, just constant escalation. Everything else can stay the same, every other plot point can go on as planned. I don't know, maybe go the Am route, have him decide that what he needs is to truly understand his residents and torture them based on that. His goal still being to help them, eventually. There are a lot of ways this could have gone, but Rewatching episodes 6 and 7 in sequence gave me actual whiplash. He was great before this, and then he sucked for an episode and promptly got killed. The reveal of his actual personality and or intent genuinely made all of his previous appearances worse in rewatch. I don't know why him doing this on purpose is this much less interesting to me, but this is a show I love. This is how I show love. This is affection. Before I give the main conclusions, the general reason I'm making this half-coherent essay and general YouTube channel is that I'm embarking in my biggest writing project. I'm dissecting why things do or don't work for me is the best way to find, well, what works and doesn't work for me. Which is especially true for things I don't like from works I think are really good. Take this video as an extension of the narrative design essays I had to write for uni. Let me know if you agree or disagree with anything I said or have any other critiques or praises for the show. I am truly interested in what people think about these things. Just be somewhat nice and generally aware that this was posted before the show's finale. So realistically, that episode might fix every single issue I've ever had with the show, and this video will become pointless. Outside of the valuable writing information I got from it, which was literally the main goal, so not pointless at all. Anyway, here's a list of key points for myself, and you if you want, to keep in mind when writing. I'm not your dad though, go wild. Character flaws are key. Substantial character flaws. Every character should have. They drive both internal and external conflict. They should push and pull against other characters' flaws. Active audience participation. Not necessary for every story, but it's good to have your viewer discover something. Be it about a character, a relationship, a plot point, a theme. Hold your cards. There are ways to make something explicit and generally hard to deny without literally stating. Contrast. Characters need to be different from each other in ways that are fundamental. Sobel and Pomni aren't literally the same, yet they feel the same, because neither of them truly contrast someone else in a significant or distinct way, and they especially don't contrast each other. Characters that are similar should contrast each other. And consistency. I really don't like that Caine's characterization changed in a single scene. Either pace big changes in a Guardian or make it seem like the shift is a change in audience interpretation rather than a change in characterization or something, I don't know. Anyway, I think that's it. I might add things when editing, but yeah, honestly, the issues I have with this show are significantly lesser than I might have made in sound here. I just wasn't sure how to acknowledge them without tackling them head on. I do genuinely like this show. If you're watching this, subscribe. You can expect a video similarly dissecting things I like and or don't like for another piece of media soon-ish. I can't just rant about a single show and call it a day for my writing investigation, no can I? And yes, Danganronpa is in fact a good example of writing. I've accepted my faith.